Hi everyone, Stepan here. I have black again. Let's see, my opponent's rating is 2417. Okay, I'm playing the Caro-Kann. I was going to play something else, but against the 2400, I need to play what I know best. I had 2 losses in the last 2 games, so I've started with 1 out of 3, which isn't good. And this guy is much higher rated, so I'm gonna do my best to stop the bleeding. For those of you who have helped me with my coffee machine, thank you. I have decalcified it, I have cleaned it twice. I hate vinegar, so I didn't do it with vinegar, but it still improved the taste of the coffee. I also got fresh coffee, freshly ground, and my coffee is better. It's not as good as it was when I first got the machine, but it's good again. So thank you, and hopefully the taste doesn't deteriorate again. Okay, so bishop c4. I'm gonna get into the game. Excuse the periods with very little talking, which are gonna happen. So bishop f5 blunders queen b3, a double attack on f7 and b7. So I cannot do that. So let's go queen c7, preventing bishop f4 and preparing bishop f5. I don't think there are any tricks with queen b3 now. I'm just gonna go e6 or even knight d5 and then b6, bishop b7 if necessary, and if knight f3 I cannot go bishop g4 because of bishop f7, losing material, but I could go bishop f5, knight f3, bishop f5, queen b3, e6 works. We will see. Yeah, bishop f5 would have been a complete disaster after queen b3. My opponent's name is Dragon Bishop. That's a weird name. I mean, it's probably plays the Dragon Sicilian with black, I guess, but... So anyway, my coffee tastes better and I'm home. I'm gonna go back to the island where I was with Lucia in about 2 days, but until then I don't understand queen f3. What does my opponent do on bishop g4? I assume he or she or they would like to play bishop f4 now. But if I throw in bishop g4, how does the queen keep supporting the f4 square? So bishop g4. Are there any tricks with bishop f7? No. The queen has to move. If it goes to g3, I can trade, preventing bishop f4. If it goes anywhere else, like e3 or d3, which seem to be the only 2 squares, then I can play e6. Okay, I'm gonna go bishop g4. I don't see why I wouldn't. Maybe my opponent plays bishop f4 anyway, but that loses the rook. I think these are the only 2 squares for the queen. If I'm not very much mistaken, yeah, okay, so I have to trade because bishop f4 is coming. Also e6, bishop f4, yeah, I have to trade. Okay, now my bishop is outside of the pawn chain, but I have to be slightly worried about my opponent's rook being active. So if I go e6, then bishop g5 doesn't seem to be a big deal. Knight f3 doesn't seem to be a big deal, although I may trade it to prevent knight e5. So e6 seems sensible enough. Is my bishop in trouble? I don't think so. Wait, let's see. e6, f3, bishop f5, g4, bishop g6. If f4, I can just take on g4. If g5, I have knight d5. If then f4, seems okay. It seems okay. I'm gonna go e6. I don't think I'm trapping my bishop or anything. I just cannot go bishop h5 after f3 because then maybe there would be some tricks. So bishop f5. Okay. My opponent just keeps advancing. Now I have the g3 square, so I'm feeling slightly better about my position. I think this is a weak structure. I mean, it's a weak structure. I don't have to think that it is weak. And it gives away a lot of dark squares. Although there could be some knight h3, knight f4, correct? So knight f4 would threaten to take the bishop and my rook is hanging. So if I go bishop d6, knight f4 castles queenside, then my rook is defended. So that seems to be the way to go. I'm actually happy that the knight cannot reach e5, and I'm not too unhappy to trade off the light squared bishop. If my opponent wishes to go knight f4, I'm just going to castle queenside. Although, is there knight e6, fe6, bishop e6, king c7? No. If f4, I still take on g4. If g5, I still play knight d5, I think. And I think that's fine. Yeah, I think this should just be fine for me. I don't see any problems. So let's start thinking actively. I have bishop g3. And that may seem like a useless move, but I don't think it is, because it forces the king to commit somewhere, and it's not going to be easy for the king to stay on the second rank, because if it goes to, let's say, d2, then castles queenside followed by c5 could be scary. So I'm guessing the king goes to e2. But if the king goes to e2, then, okay, bishop d6, that's fine. So I still want to castle queenside. I don't think there's any downside to that. I want to connect my rooks. My opponent's going to take and go knight f4. And that's fine. Now the question is, do I want to keep my bishop? Because I don't think I don't. I don't think I do, sorry. I don't think I don't. If I go knight d5, just threatening to trade, and my opponent takes on g6, then I would have to take with the f pawn. But if I go rook d8, rook back to d8, then, or even, what if I go rook h d8? I'm not sure I want to go rook h d8, even though rook h7 isn't possible immediately after knight g6, h g6, rook h7, because the knight's there. There may be g5, and then I don't have knight h5 because of g4. So I'm gonna go rook d8. Let's just make sure there are no sacrifices once again. Knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, king c7 is fine. Next, I want to go knight d5, and I think everything should be fine. And I think my knight's slightly better than the bishop if my opponent takes on g6. Although knight d5, there could be knight h5. Knight d5, knight h5. Knight d5, knight h5, there's knight e3, threatening knight c4, knight c2, and knight g2. So I don't think my opponent can ignore knight d5. Yeah, knight d5 is going to be very scary. I have a league game tomorrow morning. I'm not gonna say who I'm playing, but I've been preparing for the game extensively. I'm going to post a very long video with my prep on Patreon, and I'll use some parts of it in the video where I show you the game. I've decided to start doing that to monitor how well my prep does. Okay, so if I go knight d5 now, my opponent's going to take on g6 or on d5, or play bishop d3. If my opponent plays bishop d3, then I do have knight e3. So let's go knight d5. If knight d5, e d5, then f4 is never an issue later because I have bishop e4 that will give away e4 forever. And now I'm simply threatening to win an exchange, so something needs to be done. I mean, an exchange and a piece, so knight e3 is a threat, and knight f4 is a threat, so my opponent needs to take something. They cannot ignore knight d5. I don't know, my structure is slightly better, still slightly better. And if we reach a rook endgame with light squared bishops, the light squared bishop trade should benefit me slightly because a bunch of my pawns are on light squares. So I'm playing the Caro-Kann and my opponent's pawn chain is d4, c3, b2. Although g2, f3, g4 is kind of weak as well. But how do I get to that part of the pawn chain? I would have to play h5, and if my opponent takes on g6, that's never going to happen. It's going to be an interesting endgame. I'm up 2 minutes on the clock, which could be useful. Which trade to make? That's a very interesting question. If I were my opponent, I would take with the bishop. Definitely. But that does leave the b1, h7 diagonal extremely exposed, which means that the king is weak. And if my opponent does take bishop d5, I think I take e d5 to make sure f4, f5 doesn't undermine e6. That way I keep a symmetrical structure on the king side and sort of nullify my opponent's 3 pawns, making them 2 pawns, unless my opponent also wants to take on g6, which would then make it completely symmetrical and increase the drawing chances. But the reason I want to take with the e pawn, yeah, is, oh, okay, I have to watch out for one thing, knight d3, knight e5, okay, or knight d3, knight c5, which means that if my opponent plays knight d3, I have to snap that off. What I wanted to say is the reason I want to take with the e pawn is because my king is closer to the d file. And, well, it's not really closer to the d file, but if my opponent does something, we're going to have... Okay, that's interesting. So I cannot really go rook e8 because my opponent may take on g6 and play rook h7. So I'm gonna play king d7 to prevent an infiltration. improve my king first. I don't want to give up either file, and I don't want to trade rooks, because then it would become easier for my opponent to take on g6 and play rook h7, which is the only weakness I have. The h7 square is the only weak square in my position. And that is weak because my opponent has the option to take. Now, I don't really want to go f6 because that would weaken e6, permanently allowing knight e6, rook e6, and all sort of horrors. The knight should be better than the bishop in this position. I think that should be true. But I also don't know how to make progress with white. Because as soon as the knight comes to d3, I take it. And if the knight goes to e2 and tries to go to g3 and h5 or f5, I always have the option to take it. So I'm not really sure how my opponent should approach this. But I will say once again that I think the knight is a better piece here. If it had a way to reach e5 and provoke f6 and then come back to f4 and infiltrate on e6, I mean, that's far-fetched, but it could happen. Until this tension on g6 is resolved, I don't think progress can be made. Yeah, I wanted to say about Sunday's game. I'm preparing something very wild that I haven't played before. So the prep's going to be interesting to see, I think. I'll try to show some highlights before I show you each game in the Road to GM series from now on. And then I'll post full prep videos, unedited, with from the beginning to the end how I find my opponent's games, which tools I use to prep, and everything. You'll find that on Patreon. My opponent is 6 minutes down on the clock. I don't think it's too relevant in this position, but still. So I can never go rook e8 here, because on rook e8, king e8, there's knight g6. I still never want to take with the f pawn, because it would leave my h pawn hanging. So I either have to move my h rook to e8, and then after rook e8, knight g6, h g6, rook h7, rook e2, rook g7, rook g2, rook f7, check. I'm much worse. So I cannot do that. So I don't think I can make progress unless the bishop is taken on g6. For example, if my opponent plays king d2, which is a natural move you can probably get away with here, I wouldn't know what to do. I don't want to put my pawns on light squares. That much I'm certain of. I don't want to weaken e6. I don't want to move my king because it's placed perfectly. I cannot put a rook to the e file, so I can wait. There has to be something I can do. I wish I could transfer my king to the king side, because I don't think it's in trouble. Let's say I could play... No, it is in trouble. King g5 doesn't make too much sense. Okay, my opponent wants to double rooks. I agree with that. I'm still controlling e8 twice if rook he1 happens, and I still cannot move my h rook or play rook d8. So I think I'll just wait. I may play a5. a5 seems like a reasonable way to make progress, because if a4 isn't played, I may have a4, a3 later on. And if a4 is played, then I have a target for my light squared bishop. Let's say the king moves away. Okay, now we're just gonna be in a pretty much drawn endgame. Now I have to challenge the rooks. The knight versus bishop endgame, I'm not good enough to know. the evaluation, I would say the knight is slightly better, but I don't think it's enough of an advantage to actually convert. And then the king and pawn endgame depends on whether my opponent takes on g6 or not, but I don't think the difference is that big. I think both endgames should be drawn because it's just a symmetrical pawn structure. And I don't even think it matters that much whose king is closer. Once I play g5, my opponent's king will have 0 infiltration squares. Well, maybe a4, but I can always go b5. So the king and pawn endgame, I think, is a draw. And then the knight versus bishop endgame, I don't know. So unless my opponent plays f4 or king h4, there's no way to make progress. That much I know. If my opponent doesn't do anything, I could get my king to g5. I also know that. At this point, it may be safe to play f6 and save my bishop, even though I give away e6. But I'm not sure I want to do that. Because there's no need to do that yet. I apologize for the poor lighting. There has been a storm outside this morning. It's about 7 a.m. now, and it's still almost dark outside because of the clouds. The thunder has stopped finally, but yeah, it feels like it's nighttime. The main thing I have to prevent is knight d3, and once the knight reaches d3, I have to take it. Otherwise, I don't think I can ever be in trouble. Whose king can infiltrate? In potential king and pawn endgames, that's the thing you have to figure out. My king doesn't really have access into the position because there's g3. However, g3 does weaken f3, so if I can keep the bishop on the board, play something like bishop b1 or bishop c2, then I may be able to transfer my bishop to e2 or g2, but that's extremely unlikely. The bishop is actually immobile in positions with one open file in the center. It usually gets stuck if it starts pawn grabbing on one side on the board of the board. I don't know why my opponent is spending so much time. It seems like a pretty straightforward position. I think king d2 is necessary. Yeah, I'm just gonna go king e7. Keep things flexible. All right. Now I think I go king f6 to be able to recapture with the king if my opponent takes. If my opponent goes knight h3, I think I just go bishop c2. If knight g6, king g6, king f4. King f6. g5, king e6, king g4. Yeah, there's the king and pawn endgame is an easy draw. Okay, knight h3. My opponent wants to go f4, f5. I agree with that. So f4, f5. Let's play. Do I play bishop c2 or bishop b1? I feel like bishop c2 is the way to go. And then I'm also preparing a4. Can my opponent go f4, knight g5? That's the question. Bishop c2, f4. Do I have to play h6? probably. For now, I'm just going bishop c2. I think either way I play h6 at some point. And at some point I may be forced to play bishop b1 to give my bishop a square where my opponent has to play a3 and then my bishop can stay on these squares. That also seems okay. My opponent is down to 1 minute in this position. That seems very, very slow. Either king f4 or f4. I don't see a sensible alternative. Yeah, f4. My opponent wants to play king c2 followed by bishop g6 f5, trapping the bishop. So can I play h5 here? h5, gh5, king f5, no. I have to play h6. I'm gonna play h6. It gives my bishop a square long term if f5 does happen. And now my bishop also has e4. Which could be a problem square because of knight f2, but not really. Okay, let's throw in bishop b1 first to create some more light squared weaknesses. That opens up my bishop to the entire board. If not a3, if let's say king c1 then takes, king c2, bishop c4, no, there's no time to trap the bishop. Okay, so can I not just win a pawn? Bishop e4, g3, bishop f3, g5 takes, knight takes, attacks my bishop. However, if I play g5 first, so bishop e4, g3, g5, my opponent has to play king e3 to prevent bishop f3. g5 is very committal. However, okay, I can also play it after f5, so I'm not too worried. But if f5 ever happens, then I have g6 undermining the structure. Okay, I'm gonna go bishop e4. I think this should just be a draw. I don't see a sensible way to make progress for either side. I could have gone a4, but I may go a4 on the next move. Wow, okay. Wow. So takes, knight takes, I have bishop g2, takes, pawn takes. Don't I have king f5? Takes, takes, king f5, king e3, king g4, knight f2, king g3, knight. Okay, that's scary. Okay, I do take. I do take once. I don't know, maybe I can win now. Seems like an awful pawn structure for my opponent. I mean, pawn takes has to be... Knight takes? Yeah, alright. Why wouldn't I take the pawn? I'm just gonna take this pawn. Okay, my opponent wants to play king f2. And then... So my opponent wants to play king f2, and then when I play bishop e4, they want to take and create a passed pawn. But I do have king g6 followed by f6. He offers a draw. Well, I'm not sure I want to take a draw here. I'm also 8 minutes up on the clock, so let's try to win this. I would love to be able to play f6 without giving away e6. So let's say king e7. Let's say king e7, king f2, f6. If yeah, that's equal. But king e7, king f2, bishop e4. Ah, no, I have a very smart move. I can go king g6, and then on king f2, I can go bishop h1. Then my opponent has to play king g1 to attack the bishop, and then I go bishop e4. And then if knight e4, d4, king g2, I'm faster and I can play f5. So no draw for you. No draw. Let him play king g1. Lose another tempo. Okay. Now, I'm not sure I want to go f6. But I am sure I want to go bishop e4. Because now I'm ready to play f5. And I'm within the square of the passed d-pawn. So if bishop e4, knight e4, d4, king somewhere, f5, or let's say not f5, let's say c4, f5, d5, takes, I'm within the square. But do I have anything useful to do in the meantime? What I would really love to do is play something like king somewhere, but my f7 pawn is hanging. So okay, let's see. My opponent wants to go knight h3, knight f2 probably. So I'm going bishop e4, because now the bishop cannot be taken easily. Now taking the bishop should lose for black, for white, because I have f5. Okay. If I take, my opponent takes with the f pawn, creating a potential passed pawn. So should I just go a4? Takes f. Sorry, he takes with the c pawn. Takes, c takes. a4. My bishop always has the c2 square, so I'm gonna go a4. If you're trying to win, you keep the pawns on the board. Also, never give your opponent passed pawns. Also, if my king infiltrates now, that's gonna be the end of the game. Also, what? Doesn't f6 just win? f6, knight e4, d4, d5, takes, takes, f5, d6, I'm within the square. f6, I'm just playing f6, I think it's a winning move. On knight e6, okay, wait, let's see, f6, knight e6, dc, doesn't work. Okay, dc. How does my opponent stop this pawn? Aha, maybe my opponent wants to go knight c5. So dc, knight c5. And then the knight is attacking b6. But b6 cannot be taken. I still have to take on c4. I need to get this passed pawn. Okay, let's take. Okay, so now I can just go b5. I mean, I can also go bishop d5 followed by king f5. Yeah, this is winning now. Yeah, I'm just gonna go b5. I don't see why not. Because now everything is safe. This is just 2 pawns up and completely winning. My bishop is gonna sit on d5. There's no way out of this position for my opponent. I'm not gonna give away g5, that's certain. So let's just go bishop d5. Yeah, the king has to stay within the square. That's the main issue my opponent has. Do I trade pawns? Is the knight trapped? King takes, knight g7, king. Yeah, this is a winning endgame. The knight is completely useless now. I just have 2 passed pawns. No need to rush, I feel. So let's go here. Okay, I need to stop the checks. So king h4, king f4 seems forced, and then I just push my pawn. Yeah. Okay, this works. All right. Let's just keep making progress. I think my opponent's king could be in Zugzwang. So king h3 seems reasonable. As long as I get closer to the queening square, I don't think there's anything my opponent can do. I just need to run away from the checks. King f4 can never be played because I just queen my c-pawn. Okay, and now king g2, ultimate progress. Okay. Here, I'll just queen my other pawn. Okay. All right, let me queen my other pawn. Okay. I mean, this has to be Zugzwang, so what happens if I just move my bishop? Where does my opponent move his pieces? So bishop d5 ties down the knight completely. I mean, the knight could go to a2. So bishop d5, knight d5, bishop e5, sorry, excuse me, bishop e4, knight e4, fe4, c3 doesn't work, but on fe4, king e4, I play king d2. So bishop e4, knight e4, fe4. If king e4, then king d2 wins. Yes, that's what I'm gonna do. Zugzwang. Okay. So now let's just approach with my king. I'm just gonna queen my c-pawn. I mean, nothing's changing. Knight c3 just runs into king c2 now. Also, I just queen my c-pawn if my opponent doesn't do anything. So yeah, this is finally resignable. Yes! Yes! I'm so happy I stopped the bleeding. And my opponent's 2400. I don't win against 2400 players too often. Okay, let's just queen that pawn. Look at my king. My king is on b2. Okay, I'm just gonna take all the pawns now. Yeah. All right, and let's play, I don't know. Let's get my king to b1 and queen my pawn. King b1, a3, a2, a1, queen. Okay. I want to take with the bishop to keep a solid pawn chain. That way my opponent's never making a passed pawn. Honestly, I don't know why my opponent is playing on, but I'm gonna let them play on. Yeah, now nothing can stop my pawn. So I'm finally queening. 4 pawns up. Setting up stalemates. Yeah, I'm not gonna allow that. Also, I'm just gonna win my opponent's b4 pawn now. I'm in no rush to queen. Okay. Finally. Yes! Yes! Come on! Let's analyze. Someone mentioned in the comments that I only analyze the games for 3 minutes. I don't want to do that during the video. It seems like it would be too time consuming. I do that afterwards. But yeah, let's see. I hope that you can see everything here. Let's turn on the book. First of all, so a normal Karpov where my opponent exchanges is strange, and bishop c4. I'll just show you why bishop f5 is losing. So queen b3 and you lose. And you know, you lose a pawn. So queen c7. I didn't know that was the most common move, but it is. Okay, bishop g4 is fine. Queen g3, take, take. e6, f3, bishop. We're following some sort of theory? I didn't know that. Okay, g4, bishop g6. One game from here, it was a draw. So let's turn on the engine. Equal. Okay, yeah, king e7 should have been played. That is a much better idea. I just lost the tempo. The engine does play rook hd8. Okay. Bishop takes. Wow. Okay, my decisions were all wrong. Okay, but it's still equal. There were always slightly better moves. Okay, this is obviously equal. And now let's see. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Yeah, wow. Wow. Okay, king f5? This is still winning, but king f5... Wait. I thought on king f5 my opponent takes here. Oh yeah, of course that's winning. g5 was a blunder. Yeah, but this is still... I'm proud of bishop h1. I know that it's a hard move to find, but... Okay, a4 was the best move. Wait, draw? What? I'm sorry, I'm not good enough to understand this. Wait, what? What if I go f5? But I'm within the square. Of course, I'm not within the square of the c pawn. Come on, why am I so bad? I was expecting d5 here, and of course my king is within the square of this pawn. But I'm not within the square of the c pawn. If my opponent takes here, then I am winning. I just play f5 and we have the endgame I talked about. Okay, luckily for me, my opponent didn't see it. And this, of course, is trivial because I'm too many pawns up. And my king is too good. And I have a bunch of passed pawns. I'm still proud of getting my king to b2. Yeah. Look at the king. Yeah. Bishop takes. Yeah, and now my opponent finally gave up. It loses the knight also, because if king d1, I can play bishop f3. Yes! Okay, okay. This is probably my highest rated win in a long while. How much did I win? 18 points. Yes, I'm back over my starting rating. My starting rating was 2251. Let's go. See you tomorrow. Stay tuned for more chess.